We're going to get started here. So we're ready to go. So hello, everyone. My name is Demi Walsh. I'm a sales associate here at Walsh Duffield. I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar, which is Recreational Marijuana and Workplace Safety, presented by John Caliglio, who has a PhD for Managing Director at OSEA Incorporated. This webinar is part of Walsh Duffield's Summer School series, where we host a different subject matter expert each week to discuss some of the hottest topics surrounding insurance, employee benefits, and challenges we're facing during the pandemic. If you haven't checked out the rest of our lineup, be sure to visit walshduffield.com/summer school for a description of each presentation and for links to register. Before I introduce John, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. So today's webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording and slides after the event, so you'll each get a copy. The presentation is approved for 1 SHRM professional development credit and 1 HR recertification credit hour through HRCI. We'll email the code needed for these credits to live attendees after the webinar. We invite your comments and questions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Just type it in there and we'll hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the event. And with that, I'm happy to introduce today's presenter, John Caliglio. Has been a practicing safety engineer for almost 40 years. He has degrees in civil fire protection, industrial technology management, and advanced degrees in occupational safety, health management, environmental, and safety engineering. John maintains national certifications as certified safety professional, certified hazardous material manager, certified hazard control manager, registered professional industrial hygienist, and certified occupational hearing conservationalist. Boy, that is a mouthful, John. Today, John will be discussing the impact of legalization of recreational marijuana in New York State and a few factors to consider to maintain a safe work environment for your whole team. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to John, who's going to start today's presentation.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We had a little electronic issue. I think we loaded the program. We had probably smoked one too many doobie, and I apologize for that. But I have one certification I'm also working on right now, certified marijuana specialist, and hopefully that'll give me some more credibility as we go through this minefield of marijuana legislation. So let's get on with it and talk about the issue. Let me make sure I know how to advance the slide. There we go. So we have a couple objectives today, talking about the laws in cannabis use. We're going to talk a bit about the effects of cannabis in the workplace. And that's the real minefield, I can tell you for sure. And it's only being developed. And on that note, I'm going to make a quick statement, and you'll hear it during the presentation a few times. You need to seek out legal advice as you develop your programming. This program is not meant to provide legal advice. Now, I don't mean this just to be a disclaimer, but things are going to change so fast as we really get into this. And you might be thinking to yourself, wow, nothing's happened in the last couple of months. And that's true. And quite frankly, nothing's happened when they closed the session in Albany recently. So everybody's kind of just sitting out there waiting to see where we're going with this. But obviously, Albany has other things on their mind right now. So when it breaks, though, I think it'll break pretty quick. And we're going to still always have the difficulty between state and federal laws. So we'll talk about that this morning. So there's a lot of best practices for handling cannabis at work if you're going to. We'll get into that, but I think for the most part, it's going to be very complicated. Let me see if I get, there we go. I guess there's a sweet spot there. So what is marijuana? You know, marijuana's been around for a long time. You know, I'm a product of the 70s. Basically, back then, we were all kind of getting introduced to it, but it's been around for a long time. And you can see it's a naturally occurring plant. It's hemp. And we're talking about two portions of the marijuana plant that we're concerning ourselves with. One is what we see advertised constantly, which is the CBD portion. Okay, the cannabinoid, and it's a psychoactive cannabinoid, as we say it. It's non-intoxicating, and for the most part, with good quality control, there's no THC in it. I will tell you that there has been a case that developed that where somebody was using CBD and actually failed the drug test. And looking at the material, the CBD did in fact have THC in it. So there's a caution there for anybody using CBD, making sure it's a quality product. So THC is the one we're most concerned with, and that's the main psychoactive compound. That's where you get your supposed high or your relaxing ability there. So that's what we're talking about. If you go into the marijuana stores, which unlike back in the 70s, you can go ahead and pick your level of THC by percentage. Back in the day, nobody knew what they were really smoking. Now, you can go into a very sterile environment and pick out the product you need. We haven't really gotten to that point in New York yet, but other states have, but it's coming. I'm not advancing the way I'd like to. Why is that? There we go. I guess I got to use that. I'm just figuring out my technology here. So we got a lot of uses of cannabis, obviously the ones we know about: smoking, vaping, brewing tea. I mean, you can make tea out of anything. I have a lemon bush in my backyard. I was wondering, gee, what can I do with it? It smells good. And one of the first things is make tea. Consuming edibles, making brownies, gummies, and so forth. Topical treatments, that's where you get the CBD, and obviously capsules and supplements. So there's a wide variety of applications and introductions for individuals to get into the cannabis area. And it's going to be a growing market, believe me. CBD we talked about is if it has a high concentration of THC, it's illegal in the federal law. Understand that when we talk about the legality of CBD, marijuana, we're talking about the federal law as it relates to the THC. CBD with no THC, and in certain formulations for medical and non-medical use, it can be legal. But if it has THC, it's on the class 1 drug list, and it's illegal under federal law. Again, that's where we have the problem, because as the states make marijuana legal recreationally and medically, there's a conundrum between that and the federal law, and that's what's going to complicate and produce that minefield I talked about. So some products that, as I said, say THC free, that may not be the case, and you need to be watching quality control if you are in fact a CBD user. So how does it affect you? Smoking or inhaling, that's typically the way that we're using marijuana. And smoking or inhaling gives you that sense of, elation, as they say here. And it says it wears off in about 2 hours. Be aware of one thing, when you smoke or ingest marijuana, THC goes into the fat storing portion of your body, and it takes time to metabolize it. Therein lies the difference between alcohol. Alcohol goes to the water side of your body. Obviously, hydration is an issue with alcohol, and alcohol will be eliminated from your system much quicker. That's why after that 1 or 2 beers, we're making that run to the restroom. Marijuana doesn't. And if you're a very heavy user of marijuana, you're storing more THC in the system. And what is the impact long term? I think there's so many studies going on right now. I don't have the definitive answer. I always remember back in the 70s, the hippy dippy weatherman, which was George Carlin, the heavy user who was constantly high. How accurate that is? Well, I think only testing can tell us, and that will have an impact on the workplace, because really what's going to happen here is you're going to be restricted to not testing. I'm not saying you can't now, but there are issues now in states where it's recreationally legal that they're saying, hey, you're not going to test, you're not going to discipline or not hire because someone has marijuana in their system. You can only go forward if you in fact can say that they are you have a reasonable suspicion that they're under the influence and that influence is going to affect them. And as we go through the slides, you can see that it's very difficult to pick a level where you can say, like alcohol, where marijuana has an impact. There's no marking per deciliter of blood, for example. Some states have tried to mimic the 0.04 or 0.05 level for alcohol, and we're still waiting for some final answers there. So it's very complicated. So the bottom, you can see transdermal patches also are being utilized. And again, mostly this would be all in the medical side of marijuana. So THC affects the areas of memory, attention, balance, posture, coordination, reaction time. Some individuals are impacted on a greater basis than others. I can remember years ago being involved in a case where a fatal injury occurred. An individual who was operating a piece of heavy equipment on a dredging operation somehow drove it right off the end of the barge system, which had a stopper at the end. Went into 35 foot of water. Divers went right in, couldn't locate him because of the cloudiness of the water. And when they did find him, autopsy showed certain levels of THC in the system. And I can remember at the time trying to go to every toxicologist I knew to say, hey, what's the THC body mass indication of somebody under the influence can impact it? And no one had an answer. And I don't know how much closer we are today, because if you look at the peer reviewed, and we all know that term now, right? Peer reviewed papers, there's still a lot of disagreement and a lot of contrasting opinions on the actual impact and when you become influenced to a negative degree. So when do you lose your balance and posture? I couldn't tell you. And when does it affect your driving? You know, some are saying 5 nanograms per deciliter of blood, but I'm not sure that there's a basis for that. Federal law, that's what we have to be considering. Controlled Substances Act, and cannabis is a class 1 drug, meaning it has no value for the negative impact. If you were to go on the CDC's website and pull up marijuana fast and fact sheets, you'll see that their level of bias goes to the federal law and basically saying it has no real use, and it gets into the more negative portions of it. You go to 1,000 other websites on the internet, you'll find contrasting views to that. So right now, from a legal perspective, it's not legal. And that's going to play a part in how we go forward in the workplace. Workers' compensation. You know, this act provides employees who use medical cannabis the same rights, procedures, and protections that are given to injured workers under workers' comp law in cases where workers who are injured are prescribed medication that may prohibit, restrict, or require modification of duties. So essentially, what does that mean? I mean, there's a lot of drugs that are being prescribed in the workplace that people are taking. And if there's an injury on the job, of course, we want you to tell us, and you know, if it says do not operate machinery and so forth and so on, we want the employees to tell us. You know, there's not a lot of communication to that on a regular basis. But if they're injured on the job because of it, they're covered under workers' comp, and this will be the same consideration here. Again, this is not legal advice, but typically what is happening. So you can see state regulated cannabis programs, a little chart on the side there, you know, adult medical use regulated. You can see the whole thing, but the key thing for particularly in New York, it's been okayed for both medical and recreational use. Right now, the recreational portion is still awaiting legislative action on many of the technical needs. One is taxation and money. Who's going to be actually controlling this program? And a lot of that has not come through. Right now, I believe this is still current. You can have 3 ounces of marijuana, which would be legal on your person. More than that currently would not be legal. And we'll see how that goes and how retailers and wholesalers are actually going to be able to be licensed and what it's going to cost. But it is legal. Why are states legalizing it? Well, you can see that the medical side of it support the use of cannabis, and there are very and a cannabinoid portion of the THC. There are definitely uses, and you can see in the side there. One of the early ones was the treatment of epilepsy. It does have an impact. So, this anxiety, depression, pain management. There's still even some debate there, but it is being used. But typically on a topical or ingested, not so much on the smoking end. Although that's having an impact and is growing in the medical area too. If you look at the polls, over 54 to 60% of Americans say, hey, legalize it. So there's definitely a cultural shift in this country. And I don't believe you're going to see it stop. You got the Compassionate Care Act from 2014 that legalized and regulated the manufacture, sale of medical marijuana. But that act did not authorize the use of marijuana plant, but only the liquids. Again, the compounds that you see in the CBD and typically are THC free if they're produced properly. Medical use of cannabis and employment. Obviously, it was 2014 where we legalized it. The law encompassed in Article 3 of the cannabis law. Certified patients cannot be subject to disciplinary action solely for their medical use of cannabis. So what does that mean? And the bottom one too is certified patients are entitled to the same rights, procedures, and protections. Well, again, this is where it gets tricky. And we're, again, legal consult is important as you develop your programs and make decisions. From a federal aspect, none of this applies. So how this will be sorted out between New York, for example, and then the other states too that have similar paralleling rules is who's going to be in charge. So if someone is using medical marijuana, are you required to hire them in New York? Or from a federal aspect, can you say you have safety sensitive positions that restrict this? And we'll get more into that. Safety sensitive parallels the DOT rules, which are most prominent, which basically say, look, you can't fly a plane, drive a train, do these things because they're safety sensitive and the public depends on you not being under the influence. There's a big conflict here. So right now, for example, in New York City, you're not even allowed to test for marijuana and use it as a decision-making portion of hiring somebody. So again, you have to stay on top of these things as we go forward. Okay, New York. Okay. You can see where they listed medically on the conditions that it can treat. Pretty wide, and from my understanding and the papers and information I read, there's no doubt that it definitely has medical impact. You can see the current rule allows someone to cultivate up to 6 plants, and I guess you can see they broke it down to three mature and 3 seedlings. I can't wait to see those inspections. And you have to wait 6 months after the law is passed to start growing if you're a patient as part of the medical portion of it. And 6 months obviously has been up. And I haven't heard much more about individuals growing this or any problems. I don't think we're looking for problems. Weed in New York, again, you can possess up to 3 ounces, as I mentioned before. You can toke anywhere you can smoke a cigarette. That's one of the questions that typically comes in on these programs. Oh, can somebody smoke where there's a smoking area? The answer is yes. Now, again, if it's a workplace smoking area, do you want somebody smoking marijuana on their break? And here's where the problems come in. If they come back into work, according to New York recreational rules, unless they exhibit behaviors felt to be unsafe as a result of smoking marijuana, or it could be drinking a beer, you really can't do anything, okay? Until you make the determination that, hey, you're under the influence, you're unsafe, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about that going forward. But again, I will say to you that if the positions you have, you declare as safety sensitive, and again, this has got to be sorted out too. At some point, somebody in the state will challenge me calling a machine operator's job safety sensitive. And I think we're going to have disputes and litigation there. But again, that's my non-legal opinion. But can you, as the employer, tell somebody not to smoke on the break? I would say yes, but again, I'm going to defer and say check with counsel. It's in New York. Okay, police can't charge someone for selling marijuana unless they observe cash exchange. I really can't explain that one to you. So basically, I can give you marijuana and you can pay me for it, but just don't let me see the cash exchange. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to leave it there. Okay. The police can pull you over for impaired driving, but we hear all the discussion about that. We're trying to train behavioral specialists or make police behavioral specialists to identify someone who may be under the influence, because there's no direct test, as there is in alcohol, to say, yeah, you are in fact impaired or under the influence. So that has to be sorted out going forward too. And I haven't heard much more in the last few months about that. So you got marijuana employers, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, of course, that's what drives these things. I hate to say it, that's my bias. If there's money in it, we'll see where it goes. And it's going to legalize the sale and use of cannabis for 21 and older. That's for recreational. Now, you cannot refuse to hire, terminate, or discriminate against an individual for legal use of marijuana. Again, that's where it gets confusing. You cannot discharge or discriminate against an employee for use of marijuana immediately before a work shift. So if they're smoking a joint before they come into work, unless you can show that they're under the influence, creating an unsafe situation, you can't do anything. Legal inconsistencies. Employers who are subject to federal regulations that require certain testing or safety related to marijuana use must still abide by the regulations and may do so without violating New York law. It's an inconsistency going back to the federal law. For example, the Department of Transportation, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and or federal grants or contracts have regulations that impact marijuana use. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're in any of those areas of operation, or you're a manufacturer who is providing gear and materials and receiving federal funds or getting federal grants and so forth, you can purely depend upon the federal law and illegality of having marijuana in or under the influence in the workplace. Okay, and that kind of goes a little bit paralleling the safety sensitive portions. The U.S. Department of Justice had made clear that marijuana is illegal under the Controlled Substance Act. Now, there's been discussion, I believe Senator Schumer's talked about putting forth a bill to make marijuana legal again nationally. I haven't heard a thing since they first introduced that discussion about a month and a half ago. And we'll see what happens when Congress comes back. I think they got other things on their mind. Workplace substance abuse. What percentage of people say they've used drugs? You can see about what the numbers is, and that changes periodically. But there's a good number, and the two highest failure items for drug tests are cocaine and marijuana being number one. So obviously it's getting a lot of use. And you can see what we're talking about and using it, how they use it. From yes, every day, about 4%, to, yes, weekly at 4%. So, most people are not saying they're using it daily. But again, 4% of the of the users doing it, is there a different impact on that person because of metabolism of the THC in the system for the one who's doing weekly and so forth? So these are things we still have to be sorting out. Okay, why is it a problem in workplace? Obviously, it's easy to detect if you're smoking it. And as I said before, it stays in your system for a long time. So it's accumulative. So if you're a heavy user, there's a good possibility, and which can be obviously shown in testing, in that your level is going to have a greater impact. I know there was studies on pilots, and obviously not in the actual plane, but in the testing units where they would, the simulators, where they would have the pilot in there flying the plane and give them, one cigarette, one marijuana cigarette, and they keep adding it up. And over a period of time, and I don't have the exact numbers, but the pilot could no longer land the front nose of the plane on the center line and kept drifting off up to the final one I saw was 14 feet. There's going to have to be a lot more testing about that, because that's the impact in the workplace. And the quantity has an impact. There's no rules on acceptable levels. And again, we're still waiting for that. I think Colorado has put in one for driving. But again, how do you test it? I don't know that there's a rule or law that says we can take blood level tests. Is it going to be just a urine sample? So again, it's pretty unclear right now. And I know New York hasn't even touched on any of these issues. How's cannabis problem at work? Well, we're looking at an increased risk of accidents and injuries. So if we look at even the basic premise that it can affect our balance or make us tired or relax us too much, I mean, obviously there can be a correlation to injuries and accidents, and there are several studies being undertaken right now. So whether I say it is or isn't, we're going to have to prove that as we go forward with actual data. So you can see the other concerns we have are from performance and output. Is going to be theft, increased liability to the company, workplace violence. I don't think any of those things have been fully determined, but it can happen. I can remember years back working in a large manufacturing facility. One of the biggest problems we had were people stealing scales. And your members wonder, why are they stealing scales out of the lab? They needed it to weigh drugs. So, I mean, I don't dismiss anything. But again, facts will have to be presented with data. How does it impact your safety? The National Institute of Drug Abuse, and IDA, and again, they're going to parallel CDC's approach, being a federal agency. They're finding 55% of industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% greater absenteeism among employees who tested positive. Okay. Again, I think more data is going to be needed here. The indication is that there's definitely an impact on the job, from safety to showing up at work. The Unity Bill, okay, and this is something from the state of Oklahoma, and I insert this because I think this is where we have to be heading. And again, from a political standpoint, if you're talking to your representative and you're saying, okay, I think my jobs are safety sensitive. I don't want to have any drugs in the workplace. I don't care what you do at home, but you can't be under the influence at work. Well, Oklahoma passed the Unity Bill, which actually went through and produced a pretty good list of what they say can be safety sensitive positions. And it's not just flying the plane or driving the train or driving the transport vehicle. You can see a couple of the things they put there. For example, handling hazardous materials. I mean, makes sense to me. Working a piece of machinery, which can kill you or amputate. So again, I think we're going to see more action in many states that replicates this until the state and federal laws work each other out. Okay. And even then you may see that for the workplace, and that's where we're going to have to go. If we're going to legalize any of these drugs, and like alcohol, we don't want it in the workplace. We're going to have to identify jobs where it's just not allowable. That's going to be, I think, a given. That's my impression. So safety sensitive positions, what are they? You can take a look here. I won't read the slide to you. But if you summarize, we can see some of the things I just talked about, hazardous materials, anything that can be cause injury to the individual or others. It's the old saying, don't light up in the dynamite shack. If someone's under the influence, they're not thinking about it. I mean, boom, we're all gone. So maybe a little extreme, but down at the bottom, preparing or handling food or medicine. Would you want somebody who's fixing your prescription medicine to be under the influence? Carrying a firearm. So again, there's going to be studies, and there are, I believe, ongoing regarding the impact of marijuana use and violence. So for the tendency towards violence, and we'll see where that goes. I think they have some data now. I'm just not familiar with it, but it's all going to be, you'll be reading about it, I'm sure. So the last one there's, you send your child to daycare. Do you want that person under the influence of anything? I would think not. So a lot to be talked about going forward. Cannabis law does not prohibit drug testing of prospective or current employees. The utility of pre-employment testing is, however, minimal in light of the cannabis law now that employers cannot refuse to hire, discharge, or otherwise discriminate against an individual if they test positive. I had to read that one because I'm going to be very direct. As I said, unless you can prove by reasonable suspicion that somebody under the influence is unsafe, you're pretty much stuck. Now, again, New York City, there's a difference. New York City has its own law basically saying you just can't test when hiring and using it as a basis for hiring or not. So we're all over the place. Workplace drug testing, and again, that's what I mentioned, are prohibited from requiring prospective employees. Unless, and this is kind of where we get a little bit of the safety sensitive positions, police or peace officers, supervisors of children, medical patients. So there are some of those areas being addressed under the New York City rule. Did you look at that? OSHA. Well, I think they're going to have to figure out where they're going with this also. We know that OSHA has a general duty clause, and the general duty clause basically says we're going to present a work environment that's safe and healthy. How does marijuana, alcohol, and other drugs fit into that? Again, some of the arguments might be, I have someone who's taking a prescription for OxyContin, but I'm not prohibiting them coming from work. Again, that's a prescription item, and it's supposed to be controlled by making notice. I can't operate machinery. Are we getting to that with marijuana? I mean, again, if we're just legalizing it outright, which we have, there's still items to be worked out here as it relates to federal OSHA. Now, again, federal OSHA, how are they going to react to drug testing in the workplace? Are they going to, for example, they're basically saying, look, we don't want to have any reward programs for people not having an accident, because their attitude is they won't report the accidents to get the safety award. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's their approach. So are they going to take the same approach with marijuana? Like, don't test? Or, I mean, I don't know, but you can, we'll see as they go forward. The National Safety Council, you can see on the bottom, just simply says zero tolerance that for any employee working in a safety sensitive position. You got to go back to that. What are the safety sensitive positions? And that's where I think, again, legal advice will be needed as we go forward on this, as employers determine that and say, look, that's a safety sensitive issue. For example, I have safety engineers going out on jobs. Somewhere, some pretty hazardous areas. I consider them safety sensitive. Somebody eventually may come to me and say, John, you can't do that. And there starts the argument. So you can see federal mandates, there's several there. The DOT is involved. You can read the slide and, employers cannot ignore a positive test, even for medical use. So DOT is just not allowing the use at all. If you're a driver and you want to take medical and marijuana, you can't. Okay. So it's a safety sensitive position. You can take a minute and just read the notice there. I think you'll kind of see the inference. You can see the reference to Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. Again, that's what Congress will have to deal with if they want to make it legal, take it off that list. I don't really have a clue if it would happen or not. Politically, I think it's a sensitive area, and we'll see. You can see the Drug-Free Workplace Act says nothing about testing. Protection for employers. Now, employer, if specifically employer does not violate the law when disciplining an employee for the use of cannabis based on the following. Again, we're going right back to the federal use. State would be different. Again, there's where some of the issues are coming in that will have to be sorted out. The middle one is what we've been talking about, where the employee, are they under the influence? Okay, where the employee manifests specific articulable symptoms, okay, decreases or lessens the employee's performance. Again, I can see what's going to go on there is you better have job demands and or task evaluations to show what is the norm. Can't, without being arbitrary and capricious. Again, legal advice would probably be needed. Okay. HR best practices. Again, first one, I don't sound like a broken record, but check drug and alcohol program and have legal counsel review it and provide you advice. And I can tell you it's going to be ongoing advice because it is a changing minefield. Don't tolerate marijuana use in a job, just as you wouldn't tolerate alcohol use. That's going to be an approach taken by many. I, for one, as an employer, as I indicated, consider most all of my employees to be safety sensitive when they're out in the field, given what they're doing. But somebody could challenge that in the future. Well, that's to be seen. Train managers to spot signs of impairment. We can't just go out there and, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is, if you're going to have somebody say somebody's under the influence or can't work for some reason, they need to be trained. And I know over the years running programs that look for that and got involved with the drug return to work policies, working with Brylin and other facilities locally. Sometimes you call someone out for being under the influence, you find out that it's not alcohol or drug related, but it has to do with the diabetic condition or other things health-wise that the employee wasn't even aware of. So again, you have to be careful. Think carefully about the type of test your company does. I know the DOT requires a 5-panel test, and that's not going to change for them. Many employers were actually using a 10-panel test over the years, went back to the 5-panel, and now they're eliminating the 5th panel, which is the THC or the cannabis. So they're not even using the test. Okay, again, you can see I broken record, talk to your lawyer, wherever you are, about whatever relevant state laws you have, and how you're gonna have to deal with the federal setting. And again, education is a big deal. Whatever education you can provide to your workforce is good. Compliance recommendations, the recreational medical consumption is legal. In your company, you should not wait to develop, if you haven't already, rules and policies concerning cannabis in the workplace. See how it works and what you want to do. If you're indifferent to somebody coming in having THC in their system, fine, it's up to you. But will it impact their safety or performance? That's where you're going to have to make your decisions. And as you go forward, crafting these policies, strongly again suggest you get outside counsel to assist you to make sure you're walking that fine line between state and federal rules to stay in compliance and not get in trouble. Medical marijuana is one, for example. If you take the adage that I'm not allowing anything in, like the DOT does, somebody's going to call you on that probably. And you may have an American with Disabilities Act situation going forward for reasonable assistance in placement. So these are things that have not been defined or worked out yet. Put your policy together, okay? You can see the slide. I won't read it to you, but you can see on the one side, the employer policy should also include, you can see some of the first one there is training, okay? Clearly defined use of possession. Can you basically come right out and say there'll be no drugs on premises? I would believe so. It's your premises. But again, you need to go through that, what's important. When there's also post-accident testing. Unless you're DOT again or safety sensitive, post-accident testing, which has been used by many over the years, you get injured on the job, if you have to go for treatment, you're always going to get a drug test. That's been challenged. OSHA takes the position that, no, I can't just do that unless you have reasonable suspicion, because we don't want people not to report an injury because they're afraid of being drug tested. So those are areas that are still being worked on. Employees requesting approval. Employees should provide documentation for medical marijuana. And again, you have to decide based on all the rules, is there an impact? Is it a safety sensitive position where you're not going to allow it? And again, many of these medical marijuana treatments don't have the THC component. So I'm not advising against it. I'm saying it's something you need to be following up on and obviously getting good medical advice. Okay, any questions? I left a little bit of time here for questions, and
we do have just a couple of quick questions that have been submitted. So if anyone has any other questions, just pop them into the Q&A or the chat box, and then we'll go through them. So the one that we have here is asking about pre-employment drug screenings and for non-safety conscious positions.
okay.
So should they continue that? And if they do, it's been stated that you can't exclude them from employment because of that, but should they continue that test just to see and then just ignore that? Or how do you think that they should move forward?
Yeah, for non-safety, if we're going to say it's a non-safety sensitive position, I just wouldn't give the test, because you can't use it as a basis for your decision making, hiring or firing, and so forth. So why even have the data? I mean, I can see, again, maybe I'm thinking too far ahead, but you take the 5-panel test, you find out that the employee has THC, you have to hire him anyways if you're going to, or you find out and you decide, I'm not going to hire that person because someone else is more qualified and you're challenged. Okay. So it's a good question for council. I'm going to tell you, I mean, because these things are going to come up. I go and I get interviewed for your job. You give me the THC test. I show THC. There's 5 other candidates. You don't hire me, and I challenge it. And I tell you discriminated against me. I think that's where these are possibly going, and you have to be careful. So based on that, I probably would not give the test. And that's what we're seeing from many employers. And it's an area that's being worked out now. Again, you may need to seek out other advice on that. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, makes sense. Our next question is, if any employee has medical authorization, does that take precedence for the federal drug-free workplace requirements, like the DoD contracts?
Medical marijuana is not it's a class 1 drug. There's no medical marijuana from a federal angle. So I think there was a slide in there that talked about that, and basically, if you're a DOT safety sensitive position holder, you can't be in any medical. So if you come in with medical marijuana and you want to drive that transport truck, no, you're not going to. You're not from a federal perspective. It's an illegal drug, medical or recreational.
Okay. In another question, is there any data on what employers are identifying as safety sensitive positions, like emergency vehicle drivers, medical providers? And will that be a common place practice by employers to support that it's a good employee position?
It's a great question. Right now, the only definitive list is the federal list, which really goes to the Department of Transportation. And there may be some other federal agencies that have, it's illegal for all of them, but they're defining safety sensitive positions. Okay. Now, I showed the one slide regarding the state of Oklahoma, because that's the only state at this point where I found at the state level, they were defining what safety sensitive positions were. At this point, I know of no other states, but I haven't looked recently in the last month or so. And so I don't know. I mean, but federal wise, state of Oklahoma definitely have them. I think many employers, this list is going to grow as states do their own lists. And as companies like mine declare my certain positions as safety sensitive, challenged, litigated, and the thing begins to get settled. Okay. But at this point, it's really federal DOT that's driving the bus on this.
So we want to thank everyone who joined us today for the webinar. John, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise with us. We hope you all enjoyed this presentation. Next week, we'll be hosting Lisa Paterno to discuss retirement plans in a post-pandemic world. To register for any of our upcoming webinars or to watch videos of past webinars, visit walshduffield.com/summer school. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with our Walsh Duffield team, we are available to assist with any risk management, employee benefit, or well-being needs. John, do you have anything to add?
No, it was a pleasure doing that. If there's any questions I get to you, don't hesitate to send them over to me and I'll try to answer them as quick as possible.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us today. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.